All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. So today we are doing the Devstream breakdown for April 2022, and we have a massive amount to talk about. What you're seeing here is the first of 3 pages of notes that we have to discuss. And with this Devstream, we also got a dev workshop. That dev workshop is going over a lot of the changes that they discussed in terms of focus, but they do not go into detail on a lot of the additional details that we saw and were discussed on stream. So this video is going to be going, honestly, more in depth than the workshop is, with the caveat that a lot of those numbers they said multiple times are going to be subject to change. I'm just going to talk about those abilities in this video, and that may lead to this video being quite long. But we're going to try and get through it as quickly as possible. So first and foremost, with the Angels of the Zariman update, which we now know to be launching on the 27th of this month, they are going to be doing some small things here to streamline the path to the new war. And the first and foremost, and the one that they mentioned here, is that they're going to be removing the junction requirement to build a Spectre, which has been a long-standing, very annoying junction requirement because it just locks you in for 12 hours of not being able to progress past that junction because you didn't know you had to build a Spectre whenever you started, and now you just have to look at this 12-hour timer or spend platinum, and that doesn't feel good on either side, and building a Spectre is not a very relevant thing in the grand scheme of Warframe at this point, so I think it's going to be great that they're going to be removing that, and any streamlining to get people to the new war, especially around the Necromech area, in my opinion, is definitely a huge positive. Moving on, we have some interesting things to talk about with the evolving weapons. So the evolving weapons have some weird details here that has me more interested in the system at large, and that is that we have Incarnin challenges, as these are going to be Incarnin weapons, and we are going to do challenges to unlock the mode for them to transform. You're also going to have challenges to unlock selectable buffs after that, so you can choose like fire rate or like range and any number of other stats from what appeared to be a choice of 3. And you're going to have those 2 things happen via the challenges system. But it seems like the weapons are not going to transform and then be permanently transformed. It's not going to be like the evolving armor that we acquired, where you can just equip the higher level of the armor now. It's going to be a requirement that you meet during the mission, and then the weapon will transform. We don't know if that's going to be temporary inside the mission itself, or if it's going to transform in the mission, then stay that way for the whole duration of the mission once you meet those requirements. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see that if we have an evolving weapon that has, like, you know, some great restriction, but then becomes just absolutely insane, what that system looks like in terms of how worthwhile it is to use those weapons. And I think it's an interesting design space that they appear to be using to make these weapons relevant or possibly not relevant. One way or another, I think it'll be cool to look at, and I'm definitely interested in the system going forward. Now, let's talk about Valkyr Deluxe. Valkyr Deluxe has a fist skin that is coming along with it, and unfortunately, from what details we got today, it appears that we're not getting any kind of a Valkyr rework or buff or anything like that. And sadly, I really feel that Valkyr needed something. Even just more range on her claws would really do a lot for her, because as it stands right now, so many other Warframes are doing just exactly what Valkyr does or better as like a real baseline for what they do. And you can subsume her 2 onto like any other Warframe, which her 2 is really most of her kit, as her claws just, in my opinion, aren't that special and aren't that good as compared to a lot of other things you can be using. That being said, this deluxe skin looks absolutely fantastic. I really hope that Valkyr gets thrown something to make her a bit more relevant, or at least a bit more interesting, so that I have an excuse to use this skin, because I do think it looks great. With that, speaking of this skin and it looking great, in terms of customization, we are getting a customization upgrade, along with all of the other customization upgrades that are going to be coming in this update, along with, you know, like all the material changing skins and stuff that are also going to be included. And that is that we are going to have custom zoom in the arsenal screen. So if you go into the arsenal, as it stands right now, if you're looking at your Warframe, you're going to get a full body shot of your Warframe. If you hover over your primary, it'll zoom in on where your primary is, and so on and so forth. With this update, you are going to be able to zoom in on just like any particular part of the frame that you'd like. So whether, you know, zoom in on the helmet, make sure like the colors match and like everything's, you know, the way that you want it with your accessories or whatnot. Or if you just want to look at your Warframe's huge ass, you can zoom in and really get a full screen picture of exactly what you want. And that's really good for just different fashion frame. And also, you know, just all kinds of different purposes in terms of just making sure that your frame looks as good as possible, which is, of course, the proper endgame of Warframe. Moving on from Valkyr, we have Geyer, or Jerry, or or whatever you want to call her, we have the full kit on what she is going to be doing. So we do have a bit of gameplay with her in terms of her abilities, and I'm going to talk about her abilities real quick here. So we have her Arc Sphere. This is a damaging grenade throw that she has that basically is like an arcing area of damage. That's not the ability you're seeing here. That's her second ability. But that arcing damage is going to be increased if you hit more enemies with the initial explosion. It's basically a grenade that you're going to throw, and you'll get more damage and electric procs if you hit more enemies with the initial blast. This basically looks like the damage side of Protea's one, except for kind of worse because you only throw one of them, and it is not slash damage. So hopefully the numbers on this can back up it not having all of the other functionality that, you know, Protea tends to get with her one, because Protea also gets survivability and etc. etc. In addition to that, we have Coil Horizon, which will suck enemies in for damage, and that is the ability that you see being used here first. This is basically like a grenade that you kind of roll. It has physics to it, and you'll manually detonate it in order to suck enemies into it, which is, of course, basically, you know, it's like a physics-based kind of larva ability, and this is also going to be doing damage, though, unlike larva. So with that looks, you know, interesting. Having a grouping ability is always going to be good. And then we have Cathode Grace. This is a definite weird one, and this is going to be temporary critical chance and energy regen, but this ability is going to have a 60-second cooldown. However, as you get kills, this will have a longer duration. So if you can get enough kills while this is up, it should have no cooldown because its duration will be as long as its cooldown. I think it's interesting to have, like, you know, 1 or 2 cooldowns on a Warframe, maybe for some particularly powerful abilities. I'm really hoping that the energy generation and also the temporary crit chance is high enough that we can, you know, want to use this and not simply subsume over it for a different ability, which, notably, might be a problem for Geyer. So then we also have the Rotor Swell. This is an electric field that discharges when Geyer gets critical hits. This is in this where you see, like, her skirt flipped up and, like, the AoE around her. Basically, anytime she gets a critical hit, she's going to additionally zap enemies with her 4. This ability seems like it definitely could have a lot of potential. Of course, the numbers are not final on any of this, but the passive for her is going to allow her to, if the more electric procs that enemies have on them, you are going to get 10% critical chance for abilities from that. Now, specifically electric procs is a bit limited, but all of her abilities do electric procs, so potentially this could really help her amp up her damage. My concern with this frame is 2 things. 1, I'm worried that her abilities aren't going to scale well, and that she's not going to do enough damage to, like, be relevant in, like, late game sorties and, like, Steel Path and areas like that, even though her entire kit is, like, very clearly built around doing as much damage as possible. The second thing that I see being a potential issue is that she has no survivability whatsoever in her kit. And that's going to combine with a potential other problem we're going to be talking about in this video with the Xmas rework. So I think Geyer might have some troubles on the horizon depending on how things go for her. But if her damage is just simply fully overwhelming, maybe you don't need survivability when your survivability is killing everyone else. That is, you know, the ideal, of course. So in addition to that, with her, we are also getting the Hespar. The Hespar is the gigantic scythe weapon. You can see some of the movement here. I think in terms of animation, this looks absolutely stellar. This is exactly what I would want. Of course, we need to see the numbers and modifiers and all that business from the stance. But I think it being such a large weapon, it's almost certain that it's going to have enough range to be relevant. It's really just going to matter what kind of multipliers and guaranteed statuses, mainly slash usually, that we're going to be getting on this weapon in order for it to be, you know, relevant and usable in those high levels. Of course, the base stats of this weapon do matter, but I think for the most part, DE's good about giving us base stats that are pretty decent, especially whenever it's a first weapon, although that hasn't been the case here and there. Moving on, we have the new zone game modes. So this is going to be with the Angels of the Zaramon. This is in the Zaramon area. We have the details on all the 5 game modes that are going to be available there, including 3 brand new ones. So there's going to be Exterminate, Mobile Defense. They had to get the Mobile Defense in there somewhere, and that's just fine that it's just regular Mobile Defense off by itself. So Exterminate, Mobile Defense, and then we have Flood, Cascade, and Armageddon. We saw Cascade, and we've seen Flood. Flood was the one we talked about in the last breakdown that looks absolutely stellar and like a very hyper movement-based game mode. And Cascade seems to be a game mode that really incentivizes you to use your operator. So this will basically have these bubbles where your frame cannot go in, there's no transference, and your operator needs to purge these like little tears. And then once you get this kind of void ghost, I suppose, out, you can get back into your frame, fight them, and enemies apparently cannot enter into this zone, and you just need to defeat this ghost to basically take control of this point. Whenever I was doing the Devstream watch along on stream, somebody mentioned and absolutely nailed that what this game mode basically is an operator-centric reverse disruption, in that instead of defending these points from demolition units, you need to take these points from these bosses that are already on them. Also, in addition to this, an important detail that's coming along with this and will factor into what we're going to be talking about, which is the focus. Any enemy that requires your operator to defeat is now going to give a certain amount of focus. For the guys that come out of these, they're going to give 2,500 to the school that you currently have active. And I think that that is a great way to passively get decent amounts of focus and potentially get some more level ups than people otherwise would. Although, of course, this game mode does appear to be one that's going to really incentivize those people that have already invested a good amount in their operator to do this game mode. We don't have any word on what the rewards are, but if they can nail that part, I think that both Flood and Cascade are going to be excellent game modes that are probably going to be right up there with Disruption in terms of enjoyability, at least for me. So that all sounds fantastic. Now, let's see. Let's get into the meat here. Let's get into focus. Focus is receiving colossal changes. Absolute, just massive, complete reworks. And I want to be really clear here. A lot of these numbers are not final, and I would really encourage you to give feedback to DE in terms of, you know, your early impressions on this stuff, and just do it reasonably. DE and the way that they presented these changes and what their goals were for this system was like really upfront, and I think that those goals are good and sound, and if they're not meeting those goals, I really get the feeling that DE will make changes to go forward and make this system what people want it to be, and also just more fun. So, first and foremost, some general things here. Full refund plus of focus. The full refund plus is that you're going to get a full refund on everything you've spent in every single one of your schools, but they are entirely removing the pool. So if you've invested into the pool, you're instead going to get a refund in the form of Eidolon shards. What that means is if you have a school that you don't particularly care about, Vazarin, then you can invest points that you have extra in that if you've not maxed out your pool, and you're going to have a lot more shards to move over to a different school that you maybe care about more with the rework. So if you've not fully maxed out your pool, I would highly suggest that you do that. With that, they've reduced the max level of non-way-bound abilities to 3. A lot of abilities go to 5. So, with the much de-leveling, that is also likely to really decrease cost of any given focus school, which is tremendously good news because focus is notoriously hard to progress in and hard to make real headway in because it just takes so long to farm focus, especially as a new player. So that seems like it's going to be an excellent reduction in cost, and that is, of course, alongside the complete removal of the pool. So I really hope that we're going to be seeing a much more accessible system for new players that can get in there, get a more powerful operator, and then really feel like they're getting into, you know, a comfortable place with actually using the operator and having them do positive things for them. Also, each school will now have 2 abilities each. So you're going to have 2 active abilities, just like Warframe abilities. You're going to have a 1 and a 2 ability. You will not have a 3 and a 4, and I have some interesting theories about where that could go in the future, but we're going to hold off on those for this video. But you're going to have a first and a second ability. Now, very importantly, and DE knew this, ZENURIK is the most important one to talk about. It's clearly the most popular, it's clearly the most useful, and it is the big one. So let's go over what's going on in ZENURIK. The waybounds for ZENURIK, they're going to be the same. You're going to get more energy and all that good business. That's all great. Energy Pulse, which is the passive extra energy whenever you pick up an orb, it gives you more over time. That is the same. That is good. That energy is remaining identical. Energizing Dash is changing and will now be Wellspring. It is your first ability on ZENURIK. So instead of jumping into your operator and dashing, which does cost your operator energy, you will instead go into your operator and hit 1. So it will do exactly the same functionality it is now, although ZENURIK is being buffed because we are getting another node, which is called Hardened Wellspring. This will allow you to cast Wellspring for the usual buff you're used to getting now, but then be able to cast it again to add 20 seconds to the duration of the buff, and also give your frame plus 20% strength. They are buffing ZENURIK, and that's fantastic. And they're buffing everything. So seeing ZENURIK first really, put the best foot forward here in terms of this is going to be better. So we have Inner Might, and Inner Might is a skill that is going to give us a free cast every 60 seconds, which in general cases, I don't think is going to be super, super impactful, but for a lot of frames that are going to run like maxed blind rage and stuff like Chroma, this could really come in handy for keeping your energy economy flowing and getting that free cast of, not spending like 160 energy or whatnot on your ability once every 60 seconds can really improve the energy economy there. And I think this is going to be a nice little ability, even if you're only getting a little bit of energy out of it, even if it's like a high efficiency, like 12 cost, usually 50 energy ability. I think that, saving 12 energy every 60 seconds, that's not bad. It's going to be a decent skill to invest in. In addition, the slow that some of you are used to using by just doing the melee from operator is the second ability for the operator now. This slow is an 80% slow. I believe it lasts for 10 seconds. Could be wrong on the duration on that. But that hasn't changed at all in terms of its effectiveness. It's been a fantastic slow for a long time. It is also getting a further node that, when invested in, will give you plus 100% headshot damage on enemies that are affected by that slow. So not only are they going to be 80% slower, and this works on the vast majority of things in the game, including stuff like the disruption targets, you're also going to get plus 100% headshot damage, which really allows you to put the beats on the enemies that really need it most, which are the enemies that you're going to be using this ability on anyway. So that is a huge buff. Now, I want to talk about the thing that's missing from the ZENURIK tree, because there is a thing that's being taken away, and that is that there is no more heavy attack efficiency node. Previously, we have a 60% heavy attack efficiency node in ZENURIK. That 60% efficiency node combines with the efficiency dual stat mod, which gives 40% heavy attack efficiency and electric damage. It combines with that to cap out heavy attack efficiency at 90%. That enables heavy attack hybrid builds, where you are both building combo and using blood rush and stuff, and also able to spam heavy attacks and use very little combo that you've built up, so that you don't drop out of that very high damage level of using those heavy attacks very quickly. With that, the heavy attack stuff is gone, which is basically going to entirely remove those builds. So if you're enjoying those, it seems like those might go away. And I do say might go away. We were discussing this on stream, and the Warframe channel was in chat post their stream. And it was noted that like that may just be an oversight that was removed. So it's possible that we see that return in some way, or see some other solution to those builds going away, as it, based on the reaction, seemed like an, oh, wait, right, as opposed to a, we meant to get rid of that type of thing. So I very much think that we're not going to see the last of hybrid builds as they stand right now. And there's also definitely the potential that that could, be improved in the future. And obviously it's a build that's not too hard to expand upon. If you just give us some different types of dual stat mods that can re-enable that build, it can become very possible once again, very easily, in my opinion. With that, there is also the Void Sling, which is the new Void Dash. If you do that through enemies, you have a 50% chance to disarm them. And then the further node for that will give you 10% op energy regenerate, and you can stack that up to 4 times. Those two abilities seem like the ones in ZENURIK that aren't really going to matter, but having a 50% chance to disarm an enemy is okay, I suppose. Now, with mentioning Void Sling, you are probably immediately thinking about, oh no, right, are they nerfing Void Dash? And the answer is, I think this is going to be a side grade to Void Dash. I do not think that this is a strict nerf. I really do think that people are overreacting to it. And I think that it is most prevalent in that the last time that we saw the change to Void Sling from Void Dash, it looked like this. This is what we saw on the previous dev stream before this one, whenever we were seeing this. And this doesn't look super great, right? It looks like it could possibly be decent, but it doesn't instill a lot of confidence. As of this stream, what we've seen here has been upgraded to this. And this, I think, shows off a lot more confidently in terms of what we're going to be getting. And this looks a lot more controllable and better in tighter areas than what we have right now. So Void Sling can be activated from either a double jump or the usual way we're used to dashing right now. And I really honestly think that even if this is perhaps slightly slower, like very slightly, I think the increase to the controllability of this is going to be a huge boon, both for just the playability of it and the learnability of it for newer players. And also, I don't think it's suddenly going to be slow enough that you're not going to do it. Like, it seems like it's going to be much faster than traveling by Warframe. And also, the better specificity of it is going to help you get into those tighter areas, whether you're, like, trying to teleport up to a pipe. Instead, you can just, like, know that the light is there and you know where you're going to go in advance. Because that's what's going on here, is that you're basically shooting this light forward, and wherever that light goes is where you will end up whenever you stop holding the ability. I do really think that this is fine and good. I will take what seems to be, maybe a 10% slower dash in trade for what appears to be vastly more controllability. And D really did try and express that they're not trying to make it slower. They're trying to make it more usable and, like, more user-friendly and just, like, a good time to use, as opposed to being the most efficient thing that's ever existed in the world. And I think that that is a totally reasonable and noble goal. This is not a situation, to me, that seems like it's going to be like Blink, where you gave it to all arc wings, but then you added this big old cooldown to it. So that seems really good. Now let's talk about Naramon. Naramon comes out of this not changed too much. So we've got melee combo decay stuff. That's all the same. So you don't have to actually worry about anything that I was worried about in the Korra video. That's all going to remain identical. So keeping up combo, whether you're like Korra, Baruch, or any other frame that uses that stuff, that's all going to remain there. And Naramon's going to be very good for them. In addition to that, Affinity Spike actually gets a slight buff to the amount of affinity that you get from melee kills. So that's, nice, unexpected. And also, you're going to be able to slam from the operator, and that's going to give you double combo gain for 20 seconds. In addition to that, you are going to have a lift shockwave on your first ability, which is about 6 meters wide. I don't know how far it goes. They didn't show it off, but we'll see whenever it comes out, of course. And this shockwave is going to give plus 50% damage per enemy lifted and max stack at 4, and it's going to last 60 seconds. I think that this damage bonus is for all damage the operator and the Warframe deals, and 200% damage, if it's its own separate multiplier, is certainly nothing to sneeze at. So that could potentially be very, very good, especially for melee builds. If you just suddenly triple your damage, it turns out that that's pretty good. Who knew? And this also adds a little bit of crowd control to Naramon. Granted, it is the lifted status, which is a bit inconvenient and not as good as the slow from ZENURIK, but getting the big damage bonus on top of that, that does outperform the one you get from ZENURIK, is considerable. In addition to that, you are going to be able to open up enemies for finishers with your dash with a 40% wider sling, so it's going to be easier to hit multiple enemies, and you're also going to get plus 30% finisher damage on those enemies, which somebody's going to find a way to use that effectively with Ashe, I'm sure, because we always do with the plus finisher damage. But in addition to that, we're going to get plus 50% crit chance increase on finisher from operator mode. So with the changes to this, the melee of the operator, the little E burst, is going away, and that's being changed out with, if you melee, you immediately switch into your Warframe with no delay and start meleeing. If you're an operator, you can also hit the interact key to do a finisher, and if you're the operator, you'll automatically switch right back into your Warframe and do that finisher, which I think is really good. With that, the plus 50% critical chance, I believe from the wording that they used, that this is a flat plus 50% critical chance, which means that it is a huge buff in terms of how much crit that is, because flat crit buffs mean that if you start at 6% crit, now you have 56. You don't go from 6 to 9, you go from 6 to 56, and that is very considerable. If that's the buff that we're getting from that, that sounds fantastic, and it seems like Naramon is really the melee-focused school, doing finishers, getting, of course, the more XP, like the lifted status, which is more relevant for melee weapons and stuff. Seems like it's going in a good direction for that. I will say, Naramon is the school that I think if they're going to bring back the heavy attack efficiency node, put it into Naramon. Naramon is very clearly like the melee-focused school, and I actually honestly don't think that it makes, total sense for ZENURIK. I think that it makes more sense in Naramon if you're going to be going for that unique style of melee build. Having that be attributed to Naramon does make more overall sense. Also, I think in terms of the schools, in terms of what I would consider like the top 3, Naramon is just barely lagging behind, and that gives it just one more thing in its bucket as a cool thing that it can do that's worthwhile to invest in. So if DE is watching this video and is thinking about bringing that back, I think that that is probably the best place to do so of any of the trees, as opposed to just giving it back to ZENURIK, which very clearly is already doing absolutely phenomenal. And moving on to the next page, we're going to talk about Matter-Eye. Matter-Eye is receiving a complete ground-up change from how it is used, and this, from even just seeing the Devstream and like the immediate reactions of people, is causing a very, very volatile reaction in terms of what we're seeing from people in the Eidolon hunting community. And I think that there is a little bit of validity to that criticism, but I think overall what DE is trying to do in this tree is make Matter-Eye much better in general, and also still extraordinarily good for Eidolon hunting. So, Void Strike, which previously is the thing you just have to sit invisible in for ages and build up a multiplier, and then that multiplier would only be applied to a certain number of bullets, is getting completely reworked and changed. Instead, you will spend your entire energy pool and get 10% damage for each percentage consumed for 8 seconds with a 40-second cooldown. What this means is you go into your operator mode, and if you have full energy, you hit 1, you spend all of your energy, and you get 1000% damage bonus on everything, including Warframe damage, for 8 seconds. Now, this is objectively great. No argument, no debate. Objectively, this is great, in my opinion. There are a few things which I think are the very valid criticism of this ability, and that is that 40-second cooldown and the 8-second duration. I'm going to talk some stats for Eidolons and why there may be some better ways to do this. So for Eidolon purposes, 40 seconds is going to be much longer than like a rotation of taking the shields down on Eidolons, and you're going to have to do it multiple times per Eidolon. The amount of time that it takes an Eidolon to get up is about 15 seconds. So if you have 8 seconds, and that's going to give you enough time to take the whole shield down and then pop one of its parts, it's going to fall down, and it's going to be fallen down for about 15 seconds. So herein lies the questions of this ability. During those 8 seconds, is the 40-second cooldown cooling down? Because if it's 8 seconds and then a 40-second cooldown, that means that between uptimes, there are 40 seconds. If it is immediately starting to cool down, that means that the downtime for this ability is 32 seconds. So, for me, I see the sweet spot for this ability, along with the other changes that they've made, being a 30-second wait between Void Strikes. And the reason I see it as a 30-second wait between Void Strikes is I think that there should be incentive for you to run Eidolons with at least one other person. And if you and another person are both running Matter-Eye with Void Strike, and it takes the Eidolon 15 seconds to get up, that means that you and the other person can cooperate and communicate and alternate those Matter-Eye uptimes in order to optimize your run and go super fast. And I think that there's validity in having that be, you know, a more communicative, like higher like interaction and higher skill in terms of that coordination to take down the Eidolons as fast as possible. And I think alternating between buff uptimes is the healthiest way to do that. I think that 40 seconds, and especially if it's going to be 48 seconds in actuality, is a little slow for that. And I don't think that what this appears to say now, which is a full party of people alternating uptimes, because a full party of people alternating uptimes makes this a much more restrictive activity, because if you want to get into it, and it has to be a 4-stack that is alternating these uptimes, what that's going to entail is that you've already gotten all the stuff you need for Matter-Eye in order to be able to do that. And that makes teaching runs and runs where you're trying to help your friend get leveled up, way, way worse. I don't think it's outrageous in the environment that Warframe is that two people should be able to carry two other people and help them get further in the game. I think that fosters a better sense of community within Warframe and also lessens the toxicity of kicking people out of parties because they don't meet the minimum requirements that you must have in order for us to do this fast enough, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the cooldown of this is not necessarily like an optimization thing, because I think that no matter what, with the other Matter abilities you're going to get, you're going to do Eidolons plenty fast enough, if not faster than before. But I do think that it is more of a question of, does the ability being designed this way foster a better sense of community or a worse sense of community? And I think with the longer cooldown, it is a bit worse in that respect. With that, let's talk about the other stuff that you get here. Void Fuel is the upgrade to Void Strike, where you get 40%. It's not technically ammo efficiency, it's weapon efficiency while Void Strike is on. So for those 8 seconds, including operator ammo, you have 40% weapon efficiency, which means you use 40% less ammo. So on machine guns and whatnot, you're going to be shooting less of your reserve of ammo, meaning that you can shoot for much, much longer. This, of course, helps your uptime and helps you get the full damage out of those 8 seconds. Very, very good. Just good stuff all around. Weapon efficiency in general should also mean that for heavy attacks, this would give you 40% efficiency on heavies. But that's not hard confirmed. And also, with it only being 8 seconds, that doesn't re-enable the hybrid builds that we were talking about before, unfortunately. So I wouldn't get your hopes up too much for that. In addition, we have a buff that is 100% amp critical damage when you switch to your operator, and 50% cast speed when you switch to your frame for 20 seconds on each of those buffs. This is an incredible new node to add. 100% amp critical damage is the same positive addition that Volt's Shield adds to operators. So this essentially means that anyone using Matter Eye is getting 2 Volt Shield buffs as opposed to the 1 max that you could get before. And that is absolutely incredible for speeding up these runs, because it means those crits are going to hit hard. And they are not gonna play around with that. In addition, the 50% casting speed for a number of different Warframes is pretty compelling, because especially on frames where you really don't need energy because your energy is already solved, namely Garuda, that 50% casting speed is actually very important for her, and she'd much appreciate being able to cast all of her abilities faster without having to use a Warframe slot for it. With that, we have another new node, which is Contamination Wave. This is an activated ability of Matter Eye, and this basically puts a debuff on the enemy where they will receive 25% more operator damage vulnerability for 20 seconds. So, we do not have confirmation on if this works on the Eidolon, but for me personally, I see this mainly as a thing that you would use on an Eidolon, especially with how the rest of the ability is structured. This would be a thing where, in my opinion, the way that the design of this in my head is that one person goes in and immediately void strikes and has to use their whole energy to do it. And the second person jumps in and uses the Contamination Wave to put that 25% immediate vulnerability onto the Eidolon so that you can get these shields down as fast as possible. That makes sense. That's 2 people cooperating. Good stuff. In addition to that, killing other vulnerable enemies will add a 25% vulnerability and additional 10 seconds duration up to 3 stacks to all other enemies that have vulnerability on them. So what this says to me is the person that is getting the Vomvalis is going to be putting this on the Vomvalis and killing them, and that them killing that is going to allow for a total 50-second duration vulnerability of 100% additional damage dealt onto the Eidolon by whoever's in charge of taking the shields down for right now. It seems like a highly cooperative and interesting thing to do in the fight, where you do have a job that you're supposed to be doing, and it makes it more active, and also is a considerable damage buff. This damage buff may also be important for another thing that we're going to talk about, because we're going to wrap this all together on the Unairu tree. But this is a definite very good thing to have. Now, in addition to this, we also have a 50% efficiency on chained slings. So whenever you're teleporting around with the new sling mechanic, the more that you chain together, you're going to have 50% efficiency on that, which means they're going to cost half as much. And that's very, very good. Also, doing the chained sling, the upgrade to the 50% efficiency, is that you are going to get an additional 40% strength for 20 seconds. So ZENURIK is capable of giving you and the entire party 20% strength, but Matter Eye is capable of doing double that, plus all of the other benefits, because the passives are still the same and better, to do 40% strength. Notable thing with the passives on Matarai is that they do now affect all operator damage. So amps just in general, if you're in Matarai, already will do more damage. The combination of 100% extra critical damage, the passives giving your operator way more damage, the ammo efficiency giving you better uptime, and being able to instantly use Void Strike for 1000% additional damage, I think really makes it pretty obvious that outside of the potential change of the cooldown being a bit more, cooperation friendly and, finding groups friendly, that Matarai is just going to be a purely better experience in terms of doing a run. There's not going to be any more just sitting around invisible with your thumb up your ass, just hanging out, waiting for the number to go up, which is a boring, boring way to play the game. And they straight up say that on stream. It is uninteresting and it sucks. Not with those words. That's what I say. But it basically, really, I'm paraphrasing. It paraphrases to that. So I'm really glad to see that style of play just get out of here. Like, I don't want it anymore. I never liked it. And the changes to Matarai here make it feel like doing Eidolon hunts might suddenly become fun again, as opposed to very boring. And I'm very excited to try the amps with the new changes, because we don't have any, shot restrictions anymore. It's just pure time. So fully automatic amps might suddenly be a whole lot better with this version of Void Strike. There's tons of things to test, and it's super exciting for me personally. Now, let's talk Vazarin. Vazarin, poor Vazarin. Vazarin does not appear to be particularly good. I'm not going to say that it has no use, because what they've done here does seem like it's going to be something. But basically, you're going to get an ability where you're going to heal self and allies in void mode. So when you go invisible, you're going to heal yourself. And then the upgrade to that is that when you're fully healed, you're going to start healing your operator allies, which is fine. And then Mending Soul will also give double speed after you've used its 4 charges. So you get 4 free revives. And then after those are used up, you get 100% additional revive speed. I don't know anyone that's used all 4 of the Mending Soul charges in the last 2 years, so I don't really know how much that moves the needle. The Void Heal stuff. Void Snare, you can use your first ability to trap enemies, and then by dashing through it, you can heal allies. And then in addition to that, if you use the Sling through... Oh, I'm sorry, this is enemies here. Allies. Through allies, it'll grant them 5 seconds of invulnerability and heal them for 60% of their life. That also is very, very minor, the 5 seconds of invulnerability, and also the healing for the restrictions of you having to go through your allies and stuff. That doesn't really feel super great, and it's going to be very impactful. And then we have the Guardian Shell Iron Skin for operator and allies. So this is for all other operators with you and all allies. Basically, it is a 500 shield that for the first few seconds scales up based on the intake damage that you're taking, which is exactly what Iron Skin does. The upgrade to this ability is 90% reduced shield delay recharge and 150% speed on the shield recharge when your Guardian Shell breaks. So I think that this is close to having a real use in that specifically for Guardian Shell, if Guardian Shell worked the same way that Neja's 3 worked, in that you would go into your void mode and activate it, and it would do all its scaling and stuff, and then if it were to break, you would get a few seconds of invulnerability to reapply the Guardian Shell. I think that Vazarin would have a use for some particularly squishy Warframes like Banshee, potentially Gyre coming up here, and, Garuda, etc., 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 in order to keep yourself alive by basically adding Neja's 3 to them through the focus system. I don't think that that is too powerful or anything like that, and I think it would really be a boon to Vazarin, as I see Vazarin as by far the worst tree right now. Now, this is going to combine with whenever we get to the Xmas stuff, because those squishy Warframes might need some help in a minute, but we're going to get to that. Unairu. So Unairu, these are completely changed waybounds. This waybound is Last Gasp. You are going to get this ability on every single different school as long as you unbind it, and you're probably going to want it, especially if you're going to be a Matarai user. So Last Gasp allows you to, when you die, to get up as your operator, and you get 30% of your revive meter filled per kill you get, which means if you get 4 kills as the operator, your Warframe stands back up. That is obviously very powerful, but in places like Steel Path, it can be very, very hard for your operator to get 4 kills. But the upgrade to this, which is also a waybound, Vengeance, is going to give you double damage for your operator whenever you jump out to heal yourself. So, immediately, double damage is a whole lot better than the base damage to the operator and is going to be more relevant in more places. So that's good. In addition, the other stuff that you're going to have is you're going to be immune to slow and staggers and knockdowns whenever you jump out. So this is basically going to be prime sure-footed that you can just have on any frame through Unairu, which is not bad. Unairu Wisps are changing in that they give the same damage buff, but now whenever you generate them, the Wisps are going to seek out and find your allies to buff them up within a range, so that's very nice. Also, one of your abilities is going to be a 75% armor strip, and that's pretty good. And then in addition to that, you're going to have a field that disables all enemy shields in an AoE. Now, I am almost 100% certain that this is not going to work on the Eidolon. And if this works on the Eidolon, then we are in a new world order of Unairu in terms of fighting the Eidolon, and everything I talked about in terms of the stuff with fighting the Eidolon with Madurai is completely irrelevant. But I really don't think that it's going to work on the Eidolon. Also, your frame will be invulnerable for 4 seconds if your operator dies, which means that you just, like, do that jump backwards and teleport back to your frame. Also, Unairu is going to get an ability where if you press X while your operator is dying, your frame is going to go to where your operator was, as opposed to you going back to where your Warframe is. So that is also quite useful. Also, just your Warframe being invulnerable for 4 seconds when your op goes down means that you're just going to be completely safe no matter where you end up, and that's nice. So with this, the waybounds in Unairu are by far the most important thing. And I think if you are a Madurai user, outside of very deep Endless and potentially even in Steel Path, I think that with all the damage bonuses you get from Madurai, plus the Vengeance bonus from the waybound, when you last gasp, I don't think it's going to be very hard to get back up if you have the Madurai buffs to go around. Hitting E on enemies and giving them that extra 25% damage vulnerability on a, or not hitting E, but using that ability to give them all that vulnerability, and then plus popping Void Strike in order to have probably around 800% depending on how much energy you use for the contamination. That amount of damage, I think even with the amps, because it's also going to be doubled by Vengeance, we're talking about like 2,000% plus damage there. And with 2,000% plus damage, I think it'll be pretty simple for you to kill 4 guys and stand right back up. So I think that might be a really compelling thing to do. And another compelling point in Madurai's favor is to get those waybounds and then just have a way, way better Inaros passive, especially if you've invested deeply in your amp and the amount of damage that your operator can do already. It's going to be another very positive thing for you to do. I think draws you at least towards the Unairu waybounds, if not the actual full tree. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about here is something that was not discussed super explicitly on stream, but was sent to me post-stream and is just public information now somewhere on the forums. We're going to talk about the Xmas rework and a particular thing that's being done there. This was sent to me by Taylor, and she gave me permission to read it and everything, and I read it on stream anyway at her request. So, this is going to be how Xmas units are going to be much more threatening, and there's a lot to talk about in terms of how they are going to be much more threatening. So I'm just going to read this word for word, and it'll be on screen as well. In today's stream, the team showed off a new overhealth mechanic, aka Protection, that makes Xmas a tankier threat. Xmas units will now have a new kind of defense called Protection, which will temporarily keep them immune to Warframe crowd control abilities, and anything that will stagger, knock down, stun, mind control, ragdoll, and blind. Additionally, while Protection is active, Xmas will be unaffected by radiation status effects and susceptible to a max of 4 cold status effects at one time. This will encourage you to engage with them more interactively as opposed to easily overpowering them with abilities alone. It should shift the focus of fighting Xmas to using a mixture of using weapons and teamwork, and make Xmas units feel like more of a true threat. This is a flat value that represents a portion of their overall health and shields. It is not an additive amount. Protection is indicated with a bar over top of their existing health and shields, with the same goal of making enemies more consistent in terms of difficulty. Protection will be the same amount at each level, regardless of enemy type. So, This is crucially important depending on what Warframe you play. If you are a Nezha, Wukong, Wisp, or other Warframe that's just real hard to kill, this is not going to be a super relevant change for you. The changes to the Xmas overall is going to make them more threatening in terms of the stuff that they're going to be doing. But this protection bit is not going to affect you very much. The thing that I worry about with this on the Xmas is that this is going to highly disincentivize frames that are already greatly at risk of dying when they cannot stop their opponent from interacting with them. And that includes frames like Garuda, who just got her prime, of course, Banshee, and Korra. And we'll just go with them as the examples. So for Garuda, generally she uses Gloom. These enemies would not be affected by Gloom. That is a Warframe crowd control ability. So if those enemies are not going to be slowed, Garuda is not particularly hard to kill. So taking a couple bullets, you're going to be done. So if you don't deal with these Xmas right away, you're probably going to be dead right away. Banshee also uses crowd control from Silence, which would stumble these enemies, in addition to Gloom, which would slow these enemies. Neither of those abilities are going to work on these Xmas. Banshee will take 2 bullets and evaporate. So that's going to make it really hard to be Banshee suddenly. And for Korra, very mainly, especially in the higher level stuff, utilizes her 4, which is her chains and whips, which would cause a ragdoll. And then whatever other, there's plenty of other crowd control abilities that are Warframe crowd control abilities that Korra has access to and can use in her builds. And none of that stuff is going to affect these enemies. Ensnare might work, as that is a different type of crowd control than what is being labeled here, but it is a Warframe crowd control ability, so I think they will still be immune to that. And Korra, very much like Banshee, will get shot twice and evaporate. So I think that this change may disproportionately affect the frames that are at greater risk already of instantly dying. And in terms of frames such as, the ones I mentioned, Nezha, Wukong, Wisp, etc., 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 they are not going to be at any greater risk because getting shot was already part of the equation for those frames, and they've learned to just get better. So I do worry with that part of the Xmas rework. The other parts of the Xmas rework that they showed off with the new attacks that they're going to have and the change to the energy drain Xmas and the way that all those things are going to be more avoidable and more interactable in terms of the attacks that they're going to be sending at you, besides the gun that they're holding, all seem fantastic, all seem super interesting. Outside of maybe the electric Xmas might be too strong for new players, as electric procs tend to evaporate new players in 1 second. But I do have some concerns regarding the Xmas rework, just in terms of it really hampering the viability of a lot of Warframes that don't survive in just a raw tanking manner. Obviously, we'll see whenever the update launches, and this video has been very long, so I'm going to cut it off there. I think that this is going to be really, really positive. I think overall this update is going to be great. I think we're going to be getting at least 2 fantastic new game modes, an interesting weapon system, a new deluxe skin that I'm excited for, like the new player housing, which I hope goes very well. And the changes overall to what's going on with Focus here seem intensely good. And especially, if they, things are still subject to change in terms of me thinking that Vazarin is like the weakest right now. There's always the chance that a few numbers get changed and then suddenly it is right up there with ZENURIK and Matarai. So yeah, very excited for this stuff coming in at the end of the month. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video, and especially this last bit here where we just kind of dived into all these changes and talked about the ramifications of them within. I will see you guys tomorrow. Hopefully you had a good time and enjoyed it. Goodbye, I'll see you next time.